Coming up on We Talk News, 61% of Americans want cannabis reform now. Minimum wage and other policy initiatives can wait. California allows delivery drivers to cut in on the vaccination line, while many other states fight the ballot box questions. And sex and weed on Valentine's Day. All that and more on We Talk News next.
We are pro-cannabis media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of We Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Rye Russell, your main man from Weed Buds Radio.
Every week, Rye and I get together to report and comment on the news in the growing cannabis industry. And it seems every week, Rye, the news grows as fast as this weed itself.
It's been a busy week in the States and at the federal level.
That's right, Rye. And all eyes are on the nation's capital as they continue to prepare for cannabis reform in 2021. This week, there were more developments under the new administration of President Joe Biden. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer held his first meeting with cannabis advocates and lobbyists, and it is really the first step towards a reform bill. Meanwhile, there were representatives from the NCIA, the Marijuana Policy Project, NORML, the Drug Policy Alliance, and Students for Sensible Drug Policy, among others. And every one of them had their chance to chime in on what they would like to see in cannabis reform legislation. Now, sources in that meeting shared that at a minimum, they hope the bill will deschedule cannabis and introduce a regulatory system that is equity focused. New Jersey Senator Cory Booker will likely be the lead sponsor of that bill. And tomorrow on Green Rush Live at 4 on our PCM social media network, we'll have Michael Correa from the NCIA to give us the latest on that effort. Now, Rye, if I was polling you about what issue is the most popular among people in the United States, of course, outside of COVID relief and the vaccination rollout program, would it be, I'm going to give you multiple choice. This is like it's like a quiz. And this poll coming up is by Emerson College, by the way. So choice A, the proposed $15 minimum wage. B, citizenship for undocumented immigrants. C, rejoining the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Or legalizing cannabis. Which one is the big winner in importance, Rye, and why?
Ooh, Jimmy, I will never tell anybody what should be important to them, and that's why I try to read the news and not make it. But I'm going to take a wild guess. I think it's cannabis.
Yes, you are correct, Mr. Weed Buds Radio guy, Rye Russell. In fact, according to this Emerson College poll, legalization of cannabis is the most popular reform initiative in Congress, with 61% of the 1,429 adults polled. By the way, those people thought it was even more important than all those ideas and even more important than the performance of the new president, Joe Biden, so far. So there you go. Now,
well, Jimmy, did you know there was a Super Bowl this weekend?
I heard about it, and some guy, TB Brady, he did pretty well, that Brady guy, didn't he?
I think our friend Tom Brady has picked up his 7th Super Bowl ring, and we have a new weed endorsement coming just a few days after the big game from a former NFL Super Bowl champion, Marshaun Lynch. Jimmy, you know Marshaun.
Marshaun Lynch is a former Super Bowl champion, but he's also a Super Bowl loser, courtesy of Dante Hightower, who tackled him in the backfield that set up that Malcolm Butler interception a few years ago. I'm sure you remember that one.
We absolutely do. Well, Marshaun Lynch has announced a new premium product line. Dobie blunts, some products are even infused with, this is funny, Jimmy, some of these products are infused with THCA diamonds. However, some major network subsidiaries reported that products are containing real 24-karat diamonds.
Oops. I think that was an oops. Right?
I think so. But Marshaun is not the only NFL player involved with cannabis these days. Nope. Other former NFL stars that have entered the cannabis space include Ricky Williams, Tiki Barber, Eugene Monroe, Joe Montana, and even Marvin Washington.
I got one more for you. Leonard Marshall, the old Giants guy, is involved with a CBD company too. So I thought I'd sneak that in for you.
Well, fantastic. And I think the Gronk is also getting in on CBD. So there's going to be more players, I think, entering the cannabis space.
Indeed.
Jimmy, let's hear from Deborah Borchardt with the Green Market Report.
Thanks, guys. Canopy Growth announced its third quarter fiscal 2021 results with net revenue of $153 million. That was an increase of 23% over last year. Now, despite this increase in revenue, the company also recorded an eye-popping net loss of $829 million. They blamed the loss on impairment and restructuring charges and other related charges of $416 million. Zigzag maker Turning Point Brands reported its fourth quarter net sales increased 31% to $105 million, and the net income increased to $12.7 million. Turning Point beat analysts' expectations for the quarter. Now, for the full year, net sales increased 11% to $405 million, and the net income increased to $33 million. Columbia Cares entered into an agreement with Canaccord Genuity for 2.8 million common shares. They're going to sell those at a price of 9 Canadian dollars per share, and it's going to get them about 25 million Canadian dollars. It's expected that this offering is going to be primarily sold to one large institutional investor. And that's the big news this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt with the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
And let's head over to our cross-country state roundup because there's so much going on from coast to coast. Let's start on the West Coast, California. And what seems to be a major blow to cannabis advertising, California has overturned regulations allowing for cannabis billboards. Originally, the only restriction was you cannot advertise on the interstate within 15 miles of a state border. Now, you cannot advertise on an interstate that crosses state lines at all. And in Connecticut, Connecticut's governor has now introduced his own proposal and what the state's marijuana legalization should look like. Though it is a step in the right direction for social equity, some advocates are concerned that there's a lack of specifics. And again, in New York, Governor Andrew Cuomo and state Democrats are still butting heads on how to introduce legalization for adult use marijuana. While Cuomo has once again introduced his own proposal, other lawmakers are criticizing him for not going far enough to remove criminal penalties for marijuana-related offenses and address the harms that prohibition has caused to communities of color. And in Minnesota, while recreational marijuana legalization looks like it's off the table this year, a new bill has been introduced that would help support legalization by making it easier for social equity applicants to receive licenses. So, Jimmy, before we head to Idaho, it seems like this is a theme that is tying up a lot of legislation across the states. So this might be leaning to where the federal legalization could help with some consistency in one of these problems.
I think the states are looking for federal direction on this, Rye. What bothers me is that the voters go to the ballot box, they pass questions that pave the way for adult use or a medical marijuana program in those states. And now politicians are getting involved and they're challenging what was really a democratic moment. I don't get it. Where's the will of the people here?
Well, just wait. Because let me tell you about Idaho and South Dakota.
Yeah.
So in Idaho, recently,
Right.
The Idaho Senate passed a ban by amending the state's constitution to prevent the legalization of marijuana as well as other drugs not approved by the federal government. But in South Dakota, when it comes time to show up, 54% of South Dakota's voters voted in favor of legalizing recreational marijuana use, only to have a circuit judge appointed by the state's governor reject the change, arguing it would have far-reaching effects on nature. We'll see what happens, since advocates of the South Dakota Adult Use Initiative will definitely be appealing that decision.
Absolutely. That's just crazy. That really bothers me on so many fronts, specifically as a member of the United States of America, a democratic society, right? Will of the people, Politicians are supposed to do what they are elected to do is represent those people. It's just not happening when it doesn't fit their own agenda. And that bothers me.
Well, Jimmy, they also have budgets. So in Wisconsin, the governor of Wisconsin has now included regulating and taxing marijuana in the state's 2021-2023 budget. So besides this, he thinks that they estimate legalizing would bring over $165 million to the state, which we know would be quite an advantage for a state like Wisconsin. But Jimmy, let's close off this coast-to-coast roundup with my home state of Maine. According to the Maine Office of Marijuana Policy, nearly 45 active licenses have been given to growers, manufacturers, testing sites, and retail stores across the state. Demand is too high, and the supply chain just cannot keep up.
Doesn't surprise me. And I bet you could have predicted that in a state like Maine, because they took them so long just to get it going. They expected to run out of weed up there. And I guess now they have.
Yes, I think, well, and Jimmy, we talked about this last year. I hate to say I told you so, but we also need more testing labs. All of this is going to slow us down.
That's what happens. Well, I will say this about the way of life in Maine. It's pretty slow anyway, isn't it, Ryan?
It's the way life should be.
That's right. You bet. All right. Now, any more stories from the state of Maine?
That's it. That closes our week.
All right. So remember the vape crisis of 2019? Leafly did a great job of identifying the challenges and the cause of that crisis. Now, that report helped get vitamin E acetate banned from concentrates. And of course, it also spotlighted the dangers of the illegal market. Now, Leafly has unveiled another issue with vaping of cannabis concentrates, and it has to do with testing. They looked at all 15 legal states to see if any state upgraded their testing requirements to what is required of vape cartridges in Canada and in Europe. None had. David Downs of Leafly is the author of that 3-part series that's available on leafly.com. And he and I talked on Thursday for next week's In the Weeds podcast. One test that was never used in the States is a test of the actual vapor. It's called emissions testing, something they already test for in Europe and in Canada.
And one of the things that jumped out right at the top was Colorado is going to start testing the emissions that come out of a vapor pen in not this year, but January 1st, 2022. They're going to be looking for heavy metals. Experts say they're going to find toxins around concentrations of certainly high terpenes. But you talk to the experts and they go, yeah, emissions testing is table stakes for getting a nicotine vapor product on the market in Europe or Canada. You can't even ship them, which fits into a broader picture of like tougher regulations in places like Canada or Europe.
The entirety of that interview with David Downs on In the Weeds next week. So, Rye, we've got an interesting breaking news story from California. The state board there has decided that cannabis delivery drivers can get vaccinated before teachers in that state. Now, the reasoning is that the drivers are delivering essential medicine during this pandemic. So now I have a question for you, Rye, and our audience. I'm a lot closer to the age of 75 than you are. In Maine, of course. Now, in Massachusetts, another legal state, here in the Bay State, there are certain conditions that must be met in order to jump up in priority for vaccinations for COVID-19. Do you have that system of not seniority, but like availability and eligibility in Maine?
Well, I have no idea what we're doing for a rollout here in Maine, Jimmy, but I promise if they bump me up, I'm going to save it for you.
Well, I appreciate that since I am closer to that 75. But smoking is listed as one of the conditions that can actually help you move up in priority. And now what I really want to know is, has anybody heard if they will cover smoking of cannabis to bump you ahead in that line? Because that is certainly one of the things that, smoking is smoking, not tobacco cigarette smoking, but rather cannabis smoking. Do you think that is the same exception? So, Rye, do you think if you're a cannabis smoker, you should be able to have an opportunity to cut in line? And by the way, it's like phase 3, group 2. So it's not like it's, next in line, and it's not healthcare workers. It's people who are users of this and they inject this as a medicine. What do you think of that?
I think it's really tough, Jimmy. Honestly, for me, I have some family members that I love that I will absolutely fight for getting the vaccine before somebody like myself. So I think it's tough. I think everybody has a stance on the vaccine, but I do think that those of us that are willing and able should allow other individuals to take priority.
So I'd like to know, I'm going to ask our audience here, that if anyone knows if smoking cannabis does allow you to claim that as a medical condition, counting to either the one or the two types of medical conditions that can move you up the ladder for access to this vaccination. And you can contact us at info@procannabismedia.com. In the meantime, let's go north of the border to Solomon Israel from MJ Biz Daily's International Bureau with the Canadian Cannabis Report. Solomon?
I'm Solomon Israel from Marijuana Business Daily International, and this is the Weed Talk News Canadian Cannabis Report. Canopy Growth has posted a third quarter net loss of 830 million Canadian dollars. Some of that loss was attributed to recent cultivation facility closures. Canopy said it's aiming for positive adjusted EBITDA in its next fiscal year. In the meantime, the company said it's optimistic about entering the US THC market this calendar year. And Canadian cannabis regulator Health Canada has not issued a single fine to a Canadian cannabis company since recreational legalization in 2018, Marijuana Business Daily has learned. The fines for violating federal cannabis law can go up to $1 million Canadian dollars. However, some companies caught breaking the rules have had their cannabis licenses suspended, preventing them from selling marijuana. You can read those stories and more at mjbizdaily.com. I'm Solomon Israel for Marijuana Business Daily.
Here's this week's factoid, courtesy of MJ Biz Daily's Fact Book. Did you know that for every single dollar that is spent in the legal cannabis market, $2.50 gets injected into the economy? That fact and more available in the MJ Biz Daily Fact Book, available on their website, mjbizdaily.com. Hey, Rye, did you happen to see the article in Forbes magazine this week when they interviewed Bo Wrigley, the CEO of Parallel, a multi-state cannabis operator with 42 dispensaries across 3 states? Did you see that interview?
I don't know that anybody would believe me, because he predicted that his cannabis operation will be worth more than his family's chewing gum business. And he sold that for $23 billion in 2008.
That's absolutely correct, Rye. In fact, Parallel has invested heavily in research and development in cannabis, and Bo talked about CBN, another one of those magical cannabinoids, is an ambient killer since it helps with sleep. Bo Wrigley said that cannabinoids have the potential to improve quality of life through pain reduction, anxiety reduction, and of course, improved sleep. So, Rye, is there room for MSOs, multi-state operators, and local mom and pop dispensaries in this growing business? Or are they always going to be at odds with each other?
You know me, I think there's a place for everyone in this world and in this industry. So I think there absolutely is a place for anybody that wants to participate in the cannabis industry.
Well, and now it's time to go to Washington, D.C. with Vote Pro podcast Phil Adams for the D.C. Report. Phil?
Hi, this is Phil Adams from Vote Pro podcast, here with the Weed Talk News D.C. Report. Well, Joe Biden and the Democrats aren't the only ones feeling the heat when it comes to cannabis polling. Members of the GOP Congressional Caucus are finding themselves on the wrong side of public opinion when it comes to cannabis legalization, or so says one Democratic legislator. Senate Finance Committee Chairman Ron Wyden of Oregon told Yahoo Finance Live that his colleagues across the aisle are still trying to square their own anti-drug ideologies with rapidly evolving public opinion. Wyden said, quote, "My Republican colleagues are trying to reconcile some of the views they've long held with the fact that their voters are way out in front of them." Last November, all 5 state ballot initiatives calling for legalization of cannabis for medical and or adult use passed, most with strong bipartisan support. And a Morning Consult Politico survey taken last December found that 66% of voters, including 51% of Republicans, support a bill to federally legalize marijuana. Cannabis stocks surged last week in the wake of Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer's announced commitment to passing cannabis legalization. Advocates and investment experts caution, however, that getting such a bill through still involves clearing some high legislative hurdles. Many believe it will likely take 60 votes in the Senate to approve a measure to end the federal prohibition on marijuana. Passing more piecemeal reforms, however, such as cannabis banking legislation, is widely thought to be an easier lift. Michael Correa, lobbyist for the National Cannabis Industry Association, said that banking reform is, quote, teed up, and called it, quote, the easiest low-hanging fruit with the longest track record. GOP Congressman Glenn Grothman of Wisconsin, in remarks on the House floor last week, acknowledged that state-level cannabis legalization is reducing the illegal trafficking of cannabis from other countries, as more people have access to legal, regulated markets. A 2020 report from the Congressional Research Service lends credence to Grothman's assertion and predicts that the trend will likely continue. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
And finally, before I forget, there's another research study on the effects of cannabis on memory in aging patients. First, did you know that people in my age bracket of 60 to 64 have the highest rate of cannabis use, including a 9% increase since 2016? Now, a study in the Archives of Clinical Neuropsychology, I get that every month. I don't know about you, right? It finally concluded that the use of cannabis in older adults, yes, even older than me, has no major effect on cognitive function, I think, right? Your story next.
That's totally fair, Jimmy. And you know what? What's even funnier, I might not get that, but the asexual gets Valentine's Day. Valentine's Day is right around the corner. And what better way to celebrate than with cannabis? For a long time, people have thought weed and love go hand in hand. And this weekend should be no different. So anyone looking for those last minute gifts, swing by the dispensary, whether it is for a smooth indica, THC massage oil, your partner should love it either way. Hey, Jimmy, what do you know about Valentine's Day?
Okay, it's a day for lovers. It's also a Hallmark holiday. It's a great time, though, to actually communicate with your partner. And did you know, here's a personal item. I know I rarely share personal things on these types of shows, but I actually got a C+ in my sex class in college. Now, I aced the lab, but I definitely failed the final. I admit that. I'm comfortable with that. One thing I did learn, that the brain is actually the sex organ. Think about that on Valentine's Day. Now, next week, there's a great series of free webinars being released as part of the homegrownsummit.com. The kickoff is February 15th, and Green Rush Live co-host David Rabinovitz and I go through the history of cannabis in the U.S. with Earl Carruthers. You can go to homegrownsummit.com for a free ticket and more information. That will do it for Weed Talk News this week. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
I'm Rye Russell from Weed Buds Radio and your main man.
And remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/pro-cannabis-media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.